The pictures that you'll see are of a business, a family business that involved shipping logs from around the Great Lakes down the St. Lawrence River to Quebec City and then loaded on to ocean-going vessels and sent through to Glasgow and other ports in Great Britain. And the business started in 1820 and ended in just prior to the First World War. And it took place during the age of steam, the vessels and pumps and so on, all the functioning of the log movement were really based on steam engines. The logs actually came from around the Great Lakes in the early and mid-1800s and were picked up by family vessels that were built on an island near Kingston, Ontario. And Kingston, Ontario is at the easterly end of Lake Ontario, just prior to the start of the St. Lawrence River. And these vessels picked the logs up from the farmers who had cut them down as a process of clearing their lands for farming. And the logs came from as far away as Duluth. They were then taken to Kingston, to the island near Kingston, and turned into rafts. And those rafts were then shipped in the early years, simply sent down the river with people on them. And they simply went with the current, which sometimes through the rapids, there's 7 sets of rapids that they went through, was as much as 15 miles an hour. So it was a pretty sporty trip. Pictures were taken by my father in around 1910, when he was 16 years old. Kingston is, as I mentioned, at the beginning of the St. Lawrence River, and the island that was owned by the family, and still is 2 miles out from the Kingston Harbor, between Kingston and Wolfe Island, and it's called Garden Island. And the rafts were assembled in a bay on the easterly side of that island, and the ships were built on that island. Some 60 ships were built from 1820 to 1910, and there is much written about it all, which can be found in the archives of Queen's University in Kingston and in the records of the Maritime Museum of the Great Lakes, which is also in Kingston. The vessel Burma, which you can see has a front-loaded port, forward-ended port, and a log being pulled out of it. This ship went around the Great Lakes and collected the timber and brought it to Garden Island. You'll see that the logs were then assembled into rafts called drams, quite large actually, and the lower level of the raft was made of pine because it floated, and the pine logs were bound together, as you can see, by saplings tying them to transverse logs, and that allowed the raft to undulate as it went over the rapids. Otherwise it would break up, I think. And you will see in these pictures that they then placed the heavier logs, the oak and elm, on top of that because they would sink in the water. So for the next few pictures, you will just see those rafts being assembled And it's interesting to see the size of the oak logs. They're immense. And they were in demand in the UK during the 1800s. Who knows what for? My guess is stately homes and furniture. So you'll see in these pictures tents on the rafts. And yes, you're correct, people did live on them as they went down the St. Lawrence River. In later years, they were towed down by family-built tugs. And it is those pictures that, using these family-built tugs, that you'll see in this video. And yes, they did put a sail on them. And so once underway, people lived a normal life. I think it took 4 or 5 days to get down to Montreal. And it was quite an eventful trip. There were cooks aboard. People slept on board. And the sporty part of it, and I use that advisedly, was going over 7 sets of rapids, which started around Prescott and ended with the Lachine Rapids. And I'll go into that a bit later. And they took these rafts and moved them at roughly 15 miles an hour over some of the rapids. And to miss the rocks that were in the water in the rapids, they had to have people come aboard from the shore who knew where the rocks were and could actually row the rafts, which you will see in these pictures, that allowed them to steer the rafts around the rocks. Pretty sporty business. And you will see a picture of one of the foremen, or the foreman in the later years, Amy Guerin, kneeling on a piece of oak, having a little prayer prior to the rapids. Interesting to look at the way he was dressed. Did he have a hard hat on? I don't think so. Did he have hobbled shoes? I don't think so. They looked like slippers to me. Did he have a life jacket? I don't think so. It looked like braces to me. Were there lights on the raft? I don't think so. I didn't see any. Were there any horns and navigational devices? No, I don't see any. Were there charts? I don't see them. Where there's a GPS? No, I don't think that was there. And they were doing 15 knots at times. Yes, I think that's what happened. And you'll see in the sequence of pictures where they were going through the rapids, the last set of rapids that they went through were in fact the Lachine Rapids, and the people who came aboard to help them through the Lachine were the Mohawks at the Cononaugo Reserve, and they knew exactly where the best place to traverse the Lachine was, and they did a masterful job. So they were used for that specific area. My father's pictures were so good that if you blow these up, these pictures up, you can you'll see an awful lot of detail, and that's part of the fun of these pictures. It has been for me, because you can pick out detail, somebody knowledgeable of the time and area could probably pick out the shoreline. The first picture you see, they had to go through a swing span of the Kuto Railway Bridge, which had been built in the late 1800s, which is an interesting story which we can get into later because it had to be rebuilt. Grandfather used his tugs to replace the spans that I think there were 16 spans that had to be replaced. However, the raft you will see in the picture before this swing span, which is open, was held along overnight just prior to that, going through that span and down 3 sets of rapids, which were the Kuto, the Split Rock Rapids, Soulange Rapids, and the Cascade Rapids, 4 sets of rapids. All those have disappeared, of course, because they were bypassed by the Soulange Canal, and power projects have been used to dam the St. Lawrence at those points. In any event, they did that run all in one day and ended up in the lake just prior to Montreal. You can then see them passing under, in the next picture, they're passing under the St. Lawrence Railway Bridge, and then under that, the Victoria Bridge, which still exists. If you live near Montreal, you could probably identify exactly where those rafts were going through. And in the last picture in the sequence, you can see them passing Montreal, and the smoke of the city and so on. And there were no more rapids after that. The vessels simply continued to sail easily down the river past Montreal to Quebec City, where in Wolf's Cove, just on the easterly side of the city, they were beached and the rafts were taken apart, put on square riggers, and sent to the ultimate buyers in the UK. A series of pictures of what the family vessels did in addition to aiding the rafts down the St. Lawrence River. And during the winter, one of the vessels, you can see, was involved in cutting ice from the lake and stowing it aboard, hauling it aboard. It was sold for refrigeration because refrigerators didn't exist at that time. And you might ask yourself how the vessels got out of the ice. I don't have the answer to that. I think they waited till the ice melted. That would be my surmise. In any event, they had to cut them with big hand saws, and you can see them, some unlucky fellows, doing just that. And you can see the steam-driven winches being used to move the ice aboard. And the vessels were used also for moving coal. And if you progress a bit to the, let me count, 6 pictures showing the movement of spans of a bridge. It's quite an interesting story. This was a rebuild of the Kuto Railway Bridge, which goes from Kuto-du-Lac through to Valleyfield. And it was built, the original spans were built in the late 1800s by the federal government to move at the request of J.R. Booth, who was a major entrepreneur and timber baron, and he was endeavoring to move logs by rail through to the U.S. market directly from where he was obtaining his logs, which were around Ottawa and Algonquin Park and other areas. Prior to that, he had to float them down the Ottawa River, and that he lost a lot of logs, and it was slow and labor intensive. So lobbied the federal government to build this rail link through down the Ottawa River and then across the St. Lawrence at this point, and then by rail continuing on from Valleyfield to the eastern markets, U.S. markets. And the tugs involved here were replacing the spans that weren't strong enough. The spans carried two sets of tracks, and so and they still exist today. And what is interesting is the way they built them that is the way they were placed, was to use one tug pulling another tug, paddle wheel tug, each of them, and you can see in the first picture that the tugs pulled three barges. The farthest two barges were floated underneath the span, and then water pumped out of them by steam pumps, which lifted the span so it was free of its supports. And then it was towed, which you'll see in the next picture, and then placed between existing concrete foundations, and I think there were 16 of them. I counted them once, and I think it was 16. I could be wrong. And what is interesting is if you simply take the look at the fifth picture, and I don't know if you can blow up on the video. I think you can. But you can see that it was floated down into place, and the people were on the bridges were manhandling it into position. And then the barges filled themselves with water and sunk and were pulled out from underneath the span which was in place. And I'm told that a lot of those people who worked on that project were Mohawks from Cononagua, and gave them some experience on high steel work. And as I recollect, they were high steel workers used in building the Empire State Building and other structures in New York. And anyway, it's quite an exciting process if you can do all this, place that span, and be just upstream of 4 very active rapids. And you can see, I have no idea how they actually stopped and held the pieces in place, because there must have been water movement, and that's a very heavy span. I don't know the answer. I'd like to know. Some of the fleet, some of the 60 vessels that were built on the island and used for moving the rafts down the river or picking up the logs around the Great Lakes. The interesting thing about it is that the hull and boilers, I believe, certainly the hull, and I believe the boilers were made right on the island. I think some of the working machinery was made elsewhere. And the vessel towed wherever it was being made for the installation. In any event, they were all steam driven, except one. And at the turn of the century, some of these vessels were sunk around the easterly end of Garden Island to form a breakwater, and their hulls are still there and visible from the surface. That is when they ceased to be of serviceable value. In an interesting, if you look at the third picture of Chieftain 2, it's kind of interesting to look at it. It was, that picture shows it being used in the building of the Kuto railway span, or placing the railway span, and it's shallow draft, paddle wheel, and well suited for that job because of the shallow draft. And if it hit a rock, you could beach it and fix the paddle wheel, that is, rebuild the paddle wheel, and it wouldn't need to be dry docked. A sturdy vessel, doing a spectacular job in my opinion. The other vessels, the only one in the other pictures that is of screw type is the Frontenac tug, which was built around 1910, which is screw driven. One can talk a lot about how vessels were built, but as I mentioned earlier, the hulls were built right on the island. And these weren't all of the vessels, there were some 60 of them. And I don't believe anybody in the logging, in the rafting function, or the vessel operation function fell overboard. I don't think they lost anybody. I can be corrected on that. Maybe one or two, but over a long period of history, it was amazing that there wasn't any major loss of life. The rest of these pictures are of the buildings and examples of life on Garden Island, and a few pictures of buildings in Kingston, which I'll mention. The first three pictures are of the Wolf Islander, which was a ferry that plied between Kingston and Wolf Island, built I don't know when, forgotten when, but it was a Canadian-built vessel. She did make a stop on Garden Island during the war. As I recollect, she often took a knot or two of her way off on our dock. provided the provisions for people living on the island, and also did the necessary service to Wolf Island. There's a third picture is one of the purser. I've forgotten his name. Mooney comes to mind, but historians will correct me on that one. The next couple of pictures are just happy people walking by a building that still exists on the island. And you can see in the background the D.D. Calvin vessel, which was part of the fleet. In my own view, that first picture of the two girls, mother and daughter, holding their hats in a breeze. I don't know who they were. I think they were the wife and daughter of the captain or mate on one of the tugs. You will see them aboard one of the tugs in the next couple of pictures. And if you blow up the picture of the two ladies, which I think are mother and daughter, on board ship, you can see that, at least I think, that she made the blouse she's wearing. Yeah, I think she did. And I think beside her is her daughter. Yeah, with the same material. I think it's a charming picture. The next picture is of a boy and a dog, and that dog appears in some of the earlier shots of life on the rafts. I don't know who the boy is. I don't know who the dog is. The pictures of the buildings in the next 4 pictures, those buildings still exist today. And the next couple of pictures are of where grandfather moved in later years to a home in Kingston at 131 King. That building still exists. And Dad took a picture of the milk delivery in 1910. There it is, a horse-drawn carriage. And there's an early streetcar and the family landau. And the last couple of pictures are inside of 131 King, and you can see that people read by gas lamp, not electric lights. And there is a town car, an early Ford. I don't know the exact year of it, but a student of Ford products could identify it, I'm pretty sure. That's a quick resume of what these pictures show. Our family simply wanted to preserve the pictures and tell the story. Much more can be found about the business and in more detail by going to the Maritime Museum of the Great Lakes and look at the collection, family collection there in more detail. That's the story.